How does one become a defense lawyer for an alleged terrorist and at the same time work for the U.S. government as a major in the Marines? Well, Eric Montalvo is doing just that, handling one of the most controversial cases to come out of Guantanamo Bay. He's a military defense lawyer for Mohammed Jawad, a young man who has been in Gitmo for 6.5 years. He was first taken there in 2002 after having been accused of throwing a grenade in Kabul. Now, just recently, a U.S. judge ruled that he should be released and sent back to Afghanistan, but the U.S. government says it could file another criminal prosecution case against him. Mr. Montalvo joins me today to reveal what kind of evidence the U.S. government could use if it does file another case against Jawad. Thank you so much for being here. So where is Mohammed Jawad right now?
Well, he's currently still in Guantanamo Bay in Camp Iguana.
Now, how often do you have contact with him?
Generally, right now we're on a weekly basis, telephonic, and counsel have scheduled trips to visit with him.
Now, one of the reasons that this case is so controversial is because this guy is so young. I mean, people believe he was about 12 years old when he first was taken into Guantanamo Bay. How is his age going to play out in the court of law? One
of the issues is that the optional protocol for the Convention on the Rights of the Child formed the initial basis by which we had a tremendous complaint with what the government was doing, because all children, if they are accused of a crime, are really victims, particularly child soldiers. So when we're looking at this case, if he was alleged to have been a war criminal, we were supposed to, as a signatory to that protocol, the U.S., to do certain things, and one of the main things is rehabilitation. We have to rehabilitate him, get him back to his society, give him the tools to reintegrate, and we didn't do that. And so to me, that's one of the significant issues, is that we have an obligation in the U.S. to abide by a certain protocol, and we abandoned that responsibility.
It's interesting because the U.S. government says that if it does file another case, it has the evidence and it has witnesses. You actually had a chance to speak to some of these star witnesses. Who are they, and what are they expected to say?
Well, let's look at this, right? We've had this young man in detention for close to 7 years. He's been through numerous proceedings, including we were about 2 weeks away from a trial, a fully contested matter before the commission system. He's been through the habeas proceedings. Now, if you look at the habeas proceedings, the standard is preponderance of the evidence. So, the 51% standard. 51%, he did or didn't do what is alleged, and the government has a proper basis to hold him. Then you go into a trial, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, much, much higher. So we're sitting here, we went through the commission's process, they dismissed the case because they said they couldn't go forward. That's under the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. We're in the habeas proceeding. The U.S. government is now saying that they can't proceed for a habeas proceeding, so they can't even meet the preponderance of the evidence standard. And oh, by the way, there are all these rulings that have occurred during this period of time. So all that evidence is now off the shelf. So now we're left with anything that they figured out after the habeas proceeding, essentially. So what is left? We've spent 7 years, countless number of U.S. dollars, to investigate and detain and evaluate this case. We've had the task force review. We've had all of these people scrutinizing and looking at this thing, and we are now going to pop up on year 7 and say we couldn't get it right these last 2 cases, but we're going to get it right this time with evidence that we just acquired 7 years later. Fairly remarkable. So,
well, what kind of evidence? I mean, who are these witnesses?
Well, one of them is this tomato vendor individual, and he's alleged to had seen everything from him walking down the street to throwing the grenade to then detaining him. But a fairly lengthy discussion with him reveals that he did not in fact see anything. What happened on that day was there was an explosion in a market, and people heard the explosion, reacted as a normal human being would. They ducked. So everybody ducked down. And then from that point forward, there was a little bit of mayhem because nobody knew where the explosion came from, what was going on. This is what's going on 7 years ago. Nobody was looking for a Mohammed Jawad or any other person on that particular day. They were looking to save their own life and get out of the situation. In addition to that, you have the concern that why are these people coming forward? What's the incentive for them to come into U.S. custody? Because as I have right here, I spoke with the Attorney General of Afghanistan. Okay, and this is correspondence from the Attorney General of Afghanistan, translated, that says, "Hey, we want this young man back. We've evaluated this for ourselves. We know that the case was not investigated properly, and we want him returned to our custody to let us take care of him." So as we look at the evidence, what is making the U.S. so confident that these people are going to come forward and be credible? And, as we look into that, you have people that are paid $400 on one occasion. You have people that are being given gifts. A number of them had been promised a trip to the United States, which is a pretty big deal for somebody who's lived impoverished in a war-torn country for a significant period of time. So, these are the issues that are embedded in the Jawad's case.
Now, given all of this, how likely is it that the U.S. government will pursue another case? And if so, what you just said, seems like some of these people, some of these star witnesses could have been bribed. How is that going to play out in the court of law? Are the judges going to consider the incentives behind why these people are coming out?
If the U.S. does decide to bring him in a federal court, which would be a travesty, there are going to be rules of evidence. And the entire history of this case and all of the problems that it has that have been identified will be brought to bear. I mean, from the evidence from this alleged confession. We can talk about that. What this confession wound up being was a thumbprint on a blank piece of paper. Okay, and the other piece of paper was in some language that was not his, had all wrong information. There was nothing accurate in this document, and they finally acknowledged that one of the officers in the station had written it up, and they had told Jawad that this was his release document. That's why it's stamped. So, we go through all of these things. His torture by and abuse by the Afghan officials at the time of his detention, as well as his torture in U.S. custody.
What implications do you think this particular case could have on other cases of Guantanamo Bay detainees, especially those who have been cleared for release, and then the government says, "Oh, we might file another case against you"? Well,
indefinite detention is probably going to be a legacy that I hope President Obama does not want to endure. Guantanamo is certainly the stamp that the Bush administration, Abu Ghraib, if we're going to enter into a period where we say to the world, we will take you, and if we think you're bad, we're going to hold you forever, and you're never going to see the inside of an adjudicated process, that to me is un-American. I think some of the issue here is that we don't want to send these people back unconditionally, and we need to take a look at that and say, let the country that these people belong to welcome them back and give them an opportunity to prosper. And, if they don't do that, I'm sure they'll be held accountable within their own system.
Now, Barack Obama wants to close down Gitmo by January 2010, but many experts say that that's not likely to happen. U.S. allies are reluctant to take in some of these detainees. The Congress is a little weary. They're still waiting for a relocation plan from the White House. How likely do you think it is that the Obama administration will, in fact, meet this deadline?
First of all, I think it's very unlikely. Second of all, I think it's an unfortunate self-imposed line in the sand that undermines the president's credibility. The issue is not a facility, and it's not about a building. It's not about the real estate by which we are holding these people. It's about the fundamental principles of substantive process that are at stake here. I don't care if I'm being held in a box or in a cage or in a back room for 7 years. I'm being held in captivity. So I would prefer the fastest way to get me in front of somebody to say, I didn't do this, and get me home. And so as we wait yet almost another year while they deliberate about where they're going to put these people, it also puts back the process of whether these people even did what we said they did.
Talk a little bit about your personal experience handling this case. On the one hand, having worked for the U.S. military, and on the other hand, now defending somebody who allegedly tried to harm, even kill, some of your colleagues.
My answer is this, and and it's true, is that, first of all, I took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, both as an officer and as a citizen. So, due process of law is what holds us together as a country. It's about government accountability. We can certainly say that just because somebody gets a defense doesn't mean they get off. It means that justice was served, right? So as we look to government accountability, did the government do everything that they were supposed to do in order to, seek out the appropriate punishment? And in this particular case, I can from personal perspective say no, they did not. And that's the problem forward, is how do we get the government to be accountable for the things that they've done during this young man's confinement and, as it relates to the other cases. So the way I look at it is, if the government does its job, then they have nothing to concern themselves with me. And I'm here to hold the government accountable, and it's my government too. So that's how I answer that question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.